All right. Hello, friends. Welcome to Liberty Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarland. This one is episode 176, and the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/176. And before we get started, the last episode of this podcast was removed from YouTube for wrongthink about COVID-19. And so I got a warning on my YouTube channel. You need to go over and follow me at Odyssey. That's libertyweekly.net/Odyssey, ODYSEE, because that is the place to do it. All right, so without further ado, though, today we have Connor Freeman on, and he is a writer at the Libertarian Institute, and his writing also appears at AntiWarcom. And we've been chatting it up before this episode quite a bit about things that are on our mind. So how's it going, man?
Dude, I'm great. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, man, and I know we've been kind of talking and helping each other out with articles and stuff behind the scenes, but this is the first time we've really gotten a chance to talk. So, you want to tell the audience just a little bit about like where they can find your work and what kind of topics that you cover?
Yeah, so almost all my stuff is at the Libertarian Institute. I write pretty much about foreign policy exclusively. Um, I work in some of my libertarian stuff usually in my conclusions of my pieces, and just why it's usually I use it as a weapon against the left and the right, or the Democrats and Republicans, to argue against their foreign policy. But most of my stuff you can find at Libertarian Institute and often at antiwar.com as well.
All right.
And I'm on conflicts of interest quite a bit with Kyle Anzalone and Will Porter, our friends.
Yes, definitely. And so, one thing that you've really been focusing on lately, and I got your author page up here at the Libertarian Institute. So, you have quite a few articles, but your latest article is Faux Populists Shill for the Permanent War State. And this is something we really wanted to touch on, and something that I've identified in my work as well, is the role that the independent media has in promoting the new Cold War with Russia and China. So, what made you write this newest article here?
There's currently kind of like an internal beef in the left over a guy who's on breaking points with Crystal Ball named Sagar and Jetty, who is a big China hawk. He kind of postures as being a pro-worker, pro-union populist who can work with the left, and he's a conservative, but he's not, like, you know what I mean? Like, he's kind of conducive to being on these shows and talking with people like Crystal Ball. And I've had a bad taste in my mouth about this show for a while because I follow Robbie Martin on Twitter, who's a neocon watcher, and I've known that this guy comes from that sort of the Hudson Institute scene, and where Scooter Libby is, and they're funded by like Taiwan and Japan and South Korea, as well as Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and these sorts of things. So they have huge conflicts of interest, the same way that, like, say Center for New American Security does with all of their donors, and so, which happen to be in many cases the same groups. So I sort of saw this coming, and there was a piece that Alan McLeod put out about Sagar. Alan McLeod at Mimpress News, and I believe he writes for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting as well. And Alan's great, but he wrote this piece that I think a lot of people have been waiting for, detailing just how, like, suspicious this guy is, and his ops, so to speak. Sort of inserting neoconservative propaganda about China into the independent media scene. And and I was just going to say about, like, the bad taste in my mouth, because I've known about Crystal Ball for a while. She's from MSNBC. So when she started kind of acting like she was some leftist off the reservation, I was like, that doesn't really add up. And I also knew that at The Hill, her show Rising, before Sagar was her co-host, Buck Sexton was the co-host, and Buck Sexton was formerly at the CIA. And so Crystal Ball has this show now with Sagar, and essentially I just wanted to bring up the fact, write something for our scene, talking about how, look, you guys, I don't know how many people are into Sagar, but I want to mention to people that this dude is associated with, like, Kim Kagan and the Institute for the Study of War and all these, arch neoconservative hawks, and that he's sort of repackaging imperialism, particularly targeting China, for the independent media kind of audience. So I thought it was important to get that down and talk about it. Also, Kyle and I did a show about this recently on conflicts of interest, and I think we might have been the first people to really hit on this particular topic in our scene so far. And so I thought it was a big deal. It was relevant.
So, like, what role do you think? And I know we were talking about this beforehand, but what role do you think that the independent media has in this new Cold War?
I think that so I've been talking for a while, and when I in the pieces that I write about how like they I think that the hawks realized that Hillary Clinton and John McCain, that style of jingoism, that sort of across the board explode everything, neoconservatism, kind of centrist imperialism, is not going to appeal to kind of the people who grew up in the age of the internet, or the people who are, the generations younger than the boomers and their parents. Those people you can count on, they'll vote for whoever the Democrat or the Republican is, and they're kind of, I don't know if they're suicidal or what it is, but if you look at like the data, the people that are watching TV news, they're all like boomers and their parents in that demo, and these are the people who literally think that Donald Trump is a puppet of Putin and is a Russian agent and all these different things, and they kind of bought Russiagate hook, line, and sinker, and were scared to death by Rachel Maddow every night. So I see people like Tim Pool and especially the work that you've done on Tim Pool and the Uyghur issue. He sort of serves the same function for a different demographic within the independent media sphere. I think Tucker Carlson does much the same thing when it comes to China. Steve Bannon plays a similar role. And if you look at all these people, I emphasize they're connected to neoconservatives. Steve Bannon has a think tank called the Committee on the Present Danger China that Dave DeCamp has written about, for instance, about and Robbie Martin has talked about. They have basically it's Frank Gaffney and Steve Bannon have this rebooted Cold War era think tank that it's kind of a PNAC style operation, and they focus on China. And if you look at Tucker tried to join the CIA. He's had his own shows on CNN. In my lifetime, he's had his own shows on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. His father was vice chairman of Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is a infamous anti-Iran think tank, which also does a lot of anti-China stuff, much like Gaffney's Center for American Security Policy. And Tucker's father was director of Voice of America. He was like the CEO of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And actually, speaking of Cuba, there's sort of this talk of like Radio Marti, and we should get the big tech to get in there and restore social media in these places and get involved in these protests and this kind of thing. But Tucker's father oversaw the establishment of Radio Marti while he was director of Voice of America. And but also there's other trends like on the left. Bernie Sanders is a big hawk on Russia, supporting sanctions, airstrikes in Syria. If you look at his campaign website to this day, it says we need to phase out Assad. And it's like, so if you look at Tulsi Gabbard, she's a huge hawk for the perpetual war against any Sunni with a rifle, as Scott Horton would say. And it's like there's all these different figures who are supposed to be anti-establishment, but they've almost, I think of it like at a restaurant, you have side work. So somebody cleans plates, somebody is doing the drink machine, somebody is cleaning menus, and everybody does basically everything in front of house, like to be done by the end of the night. And you divide up responsibilities. So the way I've seen it in the independent media scene and in this kind of post Obama scene in politics, where you have these kind of the squad and Bernie and Trump, and it seems like the agenda is still being pushed forward on every front, but certain people are covering certain issues, and then they're ostensibly good on these other issues. So if you look at somebody like Ilhan Omar, who's very good on Israel Palestine, and comparatively to a lot of people, but she signed a Kelly Vlahos at the Quincy Institute when she was still at the American Conservative, wrote a piece people can look up about how she signed an AIPAC circulated letter endorsing the UN, it's now lifted, but the UN arms embargo on Iran. And the only other people supporting that were like Mike Pompeo, Trump, and I think the Dominican Republic. Like nobody else. But Ilhan Omar signed this AIPAC letter after everything AIPAC has done to her. So it's like, and she also, you can look up tweets of her suggesting that, and Jimmy Dore, I think, has talked about this, about how she goes, if we pull out of Syria, it's a gift to Russia. Like, or a gift to ISIS, and you're like, what the hell, So I think it's important to keep track of all this, because a lot of people are satisfied with rhetoric and persona, and we need more than that.
Yeah, and definitely, and it's like you see all this happening, and I've said to you before that once you really start studying foreign policy, it's like the glasses and they live, that you start to notice these trends and you start to see certain people parroting certain lines. And I guess for me, my first look through the glasses was at Tim Pool. And you're exactly right about all this stuff about how, they're good on certain issues, so it's like honey in the trap to a certain crowd. Then you get the flies in the trap and you start putting in your other agenda. Or in one thing that you really identified too was this, Thucydides trap. Like, China is the biggest danger that we've ever faced as a country. And these specifically are phrases that Tim Pool uses. And I don't, like, at some point, I mean, it seems like Occam's razor would say that the simplest explanation is that these people are compromised in some way. And I don't want to be too much of a conspiracy theorist or really slinging crap. But what do you think about that?
Well, you know, I think it's, well, two things. I think the likelihood is that you're correct on some level. A, and B, it doesn't matter if that's the case or not, because they're serving the same function they would if that was the case. So, but that's one of the reasons why I try to highlight all well, as much as I can, the hypocrisy of these kinds of characters I mentioned earlier. Because if you look at, say, I definitely think that it is on some level coordinated, because, like I just said, I think if you and I can come up with, analyze the situation and understand that they need more than just CNN. Because the thing is that's the point. The other point of my piece is, it's so insidious and so cynical to have conservative populists manufacturing consent for a new Cold War with China. And it's sort of, they do it in different people do it in different ways. Whether it's Pool focusing on the Uyghurs and this kind of thing, and encouraging we need sanctions on China and this kind of thing, and
The best
hyping
thing,
up
the best thing that Joe Biden has ever done is sanctioning China for the Uyghur genocide.
yes, and I love when when Pool be like basically, like, he'll say things like, oh yeah, the people in Taiwan are scared now that Biden's president because he won't back them up. Like, what? And Scott said to him when he was on his show, he's like, well, like, what do you think? Like, who, name your favorite president? What would he have done? Over time, if China made a move against Taiwan, it's a suicidal move. It could result in the end of the world. And so, but to to what your point, Biden, so Trump drastically expanded the new Cold War with China, the Asia pivot that was started under Obama by Hillary Clinton and those kinds of characters, Kurt Campbell, who's now the head of Indo-Pac Affairs on the National Security Council. And Biden has come in and ramped up what Trump did, especially during the COVID crisis last year. And Dave DeCamp was all over that. So if you've been reading AntiWar.com, people have been seeing that it became commonplace last year for aircraft carriers and warships and warplanes and spy planes to be all over the South China Sea now, and elsewhere in waters surrounding China. And there's been a multifaceted campaign against China, whether it's on the propaganda, whether it's on the economic front, and actual military encircling of China. I know when John Pilger made his documentary, The Coming War with China, which was like 2017, 2016, back then we had 400 bases surrounding China, and with bombers and warships and missiles, and they're looking for more missiles to put around China. And now Biden is spending more, so Trump ramped up military spending, and he was saying we need to rebuild the military and all this kind of thing. Now that was a neocon policy, of course, but Trump was supposed to be the anti-neocon, and he was supposed to end the endless wars, and this is what we elected him to do. Now, whether or not he was pressured into not doing it, again, like we were talking about, like, is it coordinated, is it not? On some level, I question that, but at the same time, it doesn't really, it matters, but in the
But it
same
doesn't.
way of
Yeah.
like it, but it doesn't. So, but Biden is now spending more on the military than we have ever in our history as a nation. So at the same, you have conservative populists hyping up this China, this what I and you and I would argue is a not an well, it's an artificial threat. China's rise does not threaten us; it threatens the empire's preeminence, and it jeopardizes the neocon strategy and goal of what they call full spectrum dominance. So in the meantime, they're launching this two-front Cold War that's getting hotter and hotter, or warmer and warmer, with Russia and China simultaneously pushing them together. And we get under Biden constant drills and military presence in the South China Sea and the Black Sea. And so my argument is that we've already spent more than $6 trillion on the war on terror, killed millions of people. I think I cite the piece from Common Dreams. I forget who did the study, if it was Cost of War or somebody else, but you look at the statistics, there's been 3 million people who have died as a result of these wars. Not directly killed, but just 1 million people alone have been killed in Iraq. You look at Yemen, the worst thing happening in the world, the genocide in Yemen, that's a quarter at least. Those are conservative estimates that are years old now, nearly a quarter of a million people, 233,000 people starved to death or killed. And since 2017, we've had studies coming out that say the interest on the whole war on terror umbrella is going to be in excess of $8 trillion. So, now our debt is $30 trillion. We're bankrupt, even worse than when Ron Paul was saying that in 2008. And we're broke, but we're launching a two-front war with Russia and China. It can be no other way. The managerial class says that we don't have a choice. It has to be this way. And you have the independent media in different pockets. You have people carrying water for these nefarious actors. And certainly the move against Russia and China from the government and from the think tanks, that is unquestionably coordinated. But so to me, it's just a part of a larger, multifaceted campaign.
And to the point about, Russia and China getting close together, I know I touched on this in my piece, the danger of great power competition with our renewed great something, all this clunky language, man, that they use to make it sound less interesting and alarming than it is. But it's not a given that Russia and China are bedfellows either. I mean, they've had a really kind of complicated history together, not to mention any imperial ambitions that China has. I mean, you have India as another, I mean, there's this canard that because of someone's massive population, they all of a sudden have all this economic power. But I mean, you do have India there, and they have, I'm sure they have ambitions. And all these other states that China would come into odds with were they to expand. Not to mention, there's the Quad, the new Quad that Dave talks about in the Pacific. Take out the American empire, but there's other powerful countries with interests there. But I wanted to touch on too this. I've seen this message being kind of talked about in what we might call the intellectual dark web. And these are people and places that have had more and more crossover with the libertarian community. And I think that's great that we're getting our message out there. But as libertarians, it's our place to call this out when we see it. And, someone who comes to mind right away is Styx Hexenhammer, and he's kind of a smaller person, but he's a really bad China hawk, and he's really bad on liberty too. But I've seen it in other places, like Joe Rogan has been bad, and Tim Dillon, I've seen tweet some questionable things about China. So does anyone else come to mind, like when I say the intellectual dark web?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think stand-up is so important because of what people like Lenny Bruce and Bill Hicks and George Carlin, to name a few, were able to accomplish in that medium. And so, it bums me out when people like Tim Dillon, who are supposed to be putative, kind of the wild men carrying the torch, which that's debatable, I guess. But he put out, he's going on Rogan saying, Putin poisons all of his enemies. It's obvious, and things like China's going to win. China's trying to take us over. He and Rogan like go on about how they think China is kind of playing us off against each other and is kind of in the culture war influencing us. And that's a thing you hear a lot of rhetoric from people saying that I think foreign actors are involved in our culture war. But you and I think it's pretty obvious that you don't need foreign actors to do that here. The government and the ruling class has really decimated our society internally in many ways. I mean, the way I see it is you have a lot of like groups that have been socially engineered into pretty bad versions of themselves and then turned against each other. And so I look to our ruling class for the responsibility for that. But to your point about the IDW, it's insidious to be like, well, these people are they're like, I'm sorry, it's laughable that Barry Weiss is the arbiter of who's like an outsider and who's edgy and in the intellectual dark web.
Right,
you know what I mean? Like, we know who the if I was going to name the intellectual dark web, it would be people like Scott Horton and Thaddeus Russell and our friends Kyle and Will and you and Keith Knight and Robbie Martin and the people at Consortium News and yeah, the list is endless, but it's a lot of people that I like from the right, left, and libertarian scene who are legitimately anti-establishment. Dave Rubin is a joke. Dave Rubin is like, well, he's not really a comedian, and he's a failed, guy from the Young Turks who changed his kind of grift into being basically a half-ass talk show like neocon on the internet. And so it makes sense why Barry Weiss would want to enhance his position. And Joe Rogan kind of gave him a huge boost. And it was a lot of people were doing this at that time, like 5 years ago, where it's like, I was a leftist, whatever that means to them. I don't think Dave Rubin was a leftist. I remember him, yelling at Jimmy Dore about, defending Israel's wars on Gaza and these sorts of things. But he's like, but I'm I'm a classical liberal now, this sort of thing. But he essentially pushes like neoconservative propaganda. Ben Shapiro is a part of the intellectual dark web, technically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he is, that's the group, the core group. But Sam Harris traffics in a lot of neoconservative stuff. But to your point, Rogan is one of these guys who, in my opinion, I think that he traffics in a lot of kind of the new Cold War stuff. If you listen to him talk about, for instance, he'll talk about we talked about before we got started about Mike Baker being on the show.
Right.
But one of the things Rogan will do is he'll talk about, like, he's still talking about the Internet Research Agency, which spent $46,000 on Facebook ads. Because of the Mueller probe, the Department of Justice had to drop their case against its parent company. That's like, there was $81 million poured into that election. Last I heard, Kyle and Will write about this, and they have a great piece called "Dangerous Game." How Russiagate ignited a new Cold War, and they talk about the figures. Like, first of all, more than half of these things, the vast majority of what they wrote, what the Internet Research Agency, those ads on Facebook were not political. The ones that were, most of them were put out after the election. And if you look at them, it's like, what was it? Like Bernie flexing in a cartoon and the rainbow flag, Hillary Clinton arm wrestling with Jesus. Like, you know what I mean? Like
these kind of World War I propaganda level posters,
Yeah, dude, and it's like, and Rogan will be like, they're playing us off against each other. I heard a story, on Sam Harris's podcast about this, about how they got like some Texas secessionist group riled up, and you know what I mean? Like it's kind of this narrative. Tucker talks about this kind of thing too. I think you said that Tim Pool does as well, about how like they basically argue that our divisiveness and the kind of lack of cohesion and all the kind of the politics of like hate and overall like division in our society, a lot of it can be blamed on Russia and China. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the results of the failed policies of our exploiter class being repackaged as Russian and Chinese aggressions, which is very convenient given the overall agenda.
It's in like, as to that point, it's kind of hard because it has echoes of like McCarthyism to it. And I think that if you look back, like McCarthy wasn't necessarily wrong in saying that there were, communist agents in the United States provoking things, or I think primarily it's in the intellectual class, like in the universities and stuff like that. So like for me, it's a little hard thing to walk because like, yeah, it is laughable to have Tim Pool saying that like, oh, our culture war is a Chinese operation that is, brought to, bring down the American empire. But, at the same time, it's like, I mean, it doesn't have to be a Chinese op. It's obvious that all the universities are like, they're all Marxist professors, so it just,
Yeah.
in what role does that have to play in the culture war? I mean, it's this whole thing about how, well, the genie's out of the bottle in terms of like how we're all pitted against each other, and it's all because of like class conflict kind of ideation and stuff like that. That doesn't really have to be a Chinese op.
Yeah, of course. It's easier to point at it and accuse that. And of course, I wouldn't be saying this if there was like a wealth of evidence to prove their accusations. The fact is that there isn't. It's like a lot of the allegations, whether it's Russiagate or solar winds or like you say, the what's going on with the Uyghurs. A lot. I mean, we're getting hit on multiple fronts with these propaganda campaigns. Where it's just like, I think, what was it, Barry Weiss or somebody was saying how during this last war on Gaza, it's just like, well, I don't want to misquote, but it was something about how, well, the mainstream media kind of parrots the Hamas line. You're like, where the
Where?
like really like
Yeah.
so there's it's quite disturbing, and I think that there's a big interest now in just sort of getting people all juiced up on these unverified accusations. And if, I think as Goebbels has said, if you tell a big lie enough times that it just becomes truth. And we've seen that happen in real time. It just in the last 4 or 5 years, like I said, with Russiagate and these sorts of things. Julian Assange is still in solitary confinement, being tortured. As far as the UN Special Representative for Torture, I think his name is Niles Melzer. That's the biggest story in the world. Is he a part of the intellectual dark web?
Right.
Seems to me he's pretty. They kind of want to hide that guy. So I would,
Well,
if it's a real group, then he should be a part of it, for Christ's sake.
Well, what I think you're saying here is that we shouldn't even be using the term intellectual dark web because it's a construct that's created by the people who want to control the narrative. And I talked about this. So I have a heavy metal podcast called Sonic Insurgency, and I talk about metal, but I always find myself talking about real issues. So I'll use an album to frame an issue. And I talked about 1984 versus Brave New World in my most recent episode, talking about a death metal album of all things. But I think the message is the same, is that this really is Orwellianism. It is using speech to control the very thoughts that we have in our mind. And I just wanted to get on my soapbox and talk about this because it's like I'm saying intellectual dark web, and that brings up, and I'm so glad that you are kind of in a way correcting me, because it's like, no, well, let's not use their, thought control phrase. Let's say it for what it is. If we're saying intellectual dark web, it is people like, of course, Scott Horton and us, we put that forward, but it's people like Julian Assange,
Yeah, 100%. Hell, people like Bob Perry, who founded Consortium News because he knew that he and a lot of other people who are writing real journalism, real investigative journalism, were having a hard time getting published. I know that Seymour Hersh had trouble getting his pieces about the false flags in Syria. I think the one in Khan Sheikhoun in 2017, his piece about that, I think he had to publish it in the German press. And that's Seymour Hersh. It's like it doesn't get more prestigious than that. So, and if you look at Garrett Porter works for the Gray Zone and at the Gray Zone and AntiWar.com, and he's run at AntiWar.com. And this guy is one of the greatest investigative reporters we got. And if there is an intellectual dark web, Garrett Porter should be, one of the main guys. He's on that Mount Rushmore of that, whatever that is. But no, I mean, it's so cynical because, first of all, that piece was written by Barry Weiss for the New York Times, where they did these goofy, cringe photo shoots of, the Weinstein brothers and Sam Harris, and they're like hiding in bushes and shit. And it's like, Eric Weinstein with an umbrella in the rain. It's so goofy. But like, Barry Weiss is deciding who and Barry Weiss too, if you look at like well, a lot when she left the New York Times, you've made a point before we got started about there's a lot of people who do this kind of thing where it's like, I was too edgy for the establishment. Now I'm over here. Like Barry Weiss is a great example of that because she left the New York Times and the idea is she's been repackaged as like kind of a free speech warrior. And I don't remember exactly why it was that was it over like something to do with Israel or her being too conservative or something. I don't remember, but I know she's got kind of a weird thing. Her image is sort of like she's progressive and woke, but she's a Zionist and she's a neocon. Like she was the one who went on Rogan and said that I've got my issues with Tulsi Gabbard, but it was very nefarious to go on there and call her an Assad toady when she first of all didn't know what toady meant, and also just red baiting somebody like that over a war that truthfully you want to question somebody's patriotism, which is essentially what she's doing. Well, that obviously Operation Timber Sycamore, this was unleashing with our allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia and Britain and France and Turkey, jihadists, terrorists like al-Nusra, for instance, on to the people of Syria in a proxy war that was agitated for by, the Israelis and the Saudis, and 500,000 people got killed. That's straight up treason. And so when she does that, she is the voice of the establishment. She spent a lot of time. I remember hearing on the Scott Horton show. I don't remember if it was Ray McGovern or somebody else that was talking years ago about Barry Weiss's history. I think Gray Zone put out a piece about this too. She's been getting people canceled for being good on Palestine for years. I mean, that's what she used to do before she was writing at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times on college campuses. She would do this kind of thing and get professors fired, and these sort of calling them anti-Semites and these sorts of things. And it's like, hell, if you're the free speech warrior, we're screwed.
And so we wanted to address this when we were talking before the show. We wanted to address this, and let me do so with the disclaimer that I do this out of love for the libertarian community, but I am concerned, and I think you share this concern, that there are a lot of people in our circles who are they're buying the honey in the trap, in that they put these people on pedestals, people in the, I just decried this phrase, but the intellectual dark web, but for lack of a better term. And I think it's concerning. Like specifically, I'll mention that in the Mises Caucus Facebook group, there are memes being created that take these figures who are in these circles and they put them on like Mises Caucus backgrounds with the logo on it, and they have like a quote from them. And it's fine to certain content that they put out, but the big message that I'm hearing is that, oh, there are people in the mainstream independent media who are speaking liberty like in our dialectic. And I think it's dangerous because sure, you get that, but on these big important issues, it's insidious.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't, I remember somebody talking about, Dave with his, I still don't know if he's explicitly announced that he's running for president yet.
I thought he did in some roundabout way.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember somebody suggesting in a debate about this. I don't remember if it was when they had when Clint from Liberty Lockdown had Vin Armani and who's the other guy, Matt Erickson on, who anyway, that's another story. But they had them on. Somebody was saying something about how, well, if Dave can get in with the intellectual dark web, and I remember hearing that and I was thinking, he's not going to get in with the intellectual dark web. He's in with Rogan. He's best friends with Scott Horton. So the IDW won't let, if Dave doesn't compromise himself, which I don't see him doing that. I think he would have to legitimately like flip on foreign policy to be a part of that group. I don't think that they want that anywhere near them, frankly, because Tim Dillon is kind of a different story, because Tim Dillon is, you don't know when he's joking or not. And he kind of has this nihilistic, we're all gonna die, Epstein didn't kill himself kind of shtick. And it's funny. But it's not really serious. In other words, the way I look at it is, I think Bill Hicks was out there really trying to like change people's lives at some point. I don't think that's what Tim Dillon is doing. And also Hicks was like a legitimate anti-imperialist. And so, but I'll just say the thing with the so I think that another issue is that people. Oh, so here's a good example. Remember when John Cena made that whole thing about he apologized to China for accidentally saying that Taiwan. He goes, "It's the first country we've done press for Fast and Furious." So yeah, my take on that is, how many of the people in our scene who made fun of John Cena and called him a cuck and whatever else they said know who Randall Shriver is? Because Randall Shriver was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for I think it's Asia and Pacific Affairs, and he has these think tanks with Richard Armitage, like the Project 2049 no, not Project 2049. It's the Armitage International. That might be it. Project 2049. The Garrett Porter wrote a piece about this guy. He comes in. He's been funded by the arms dealers, our big like military industrial complex firms, and Taiwan, different like think tanks and like groups that are made up of like Taiwanese former top defense officials and these kinds of things. And he engineered an arms sale called Fortress Taiwan that Gareth describes. He goes, the arms sales Shriver has overseen represent the most dangerous U.S. escalation against China in years. And these were, massive arms sales for Lockheed's upgraded F-16s. No president since George H.W. Bush has made these kinds of arms sales to Taiwan for fear of stoking tensions that much with China. And he also sold them Boeing's AGM-84E SLAM missiles. They're called standoff land attack missiles. And they can hit far inland targets, civilian and military, in China and the Nanking region. So this is a drastic escalation. Now, why do we not hate that guy? But we hate John Cena, who, by the way, the indication to me is, first of all, he's parroting a U.S. line. He's not being, it's not all about, I mean, like, yeah, he wants to make more money and they want to cover their nut on Fast and Furious. But that's the U.S. policy. Like when the World Health Organization doesn't come out and everybody was like, they won't recognize Taiwan, this sort of thing. That's a U.S. policy. We have the one China policy. We have strategic ambiguity. Now, neoconservative hawks like Tom Cotton want to change that. And draw all these red lines and have strategic clarity as opposed to strategic ambiguity. In other words, he's explicitly said we should go to war with China if they make a move against Taiwan. We have Biden's new nominee for Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, who is saying, Josh Hawley asked him at the Senate Armed Services Committee, I believe, hearings. There was just a piece up about this at AntiWarcom. And they asked him, do you think it's imperative that the U.S. military, the Navy, be able to prevent a Chinese attack on Taiwan? He goes, absolutely. And he also supports our tonnage in terms of our Navy dwarfs that of the Chinese, but they have like 355 ships and we have like, I think 293. So he wants to put all this more money into the Navy. That's a big part of this Asia pivot, is all this money and resources going to not only like Indo-Pacific Command and Euro Command, shifting from like CENTCOM. And you talk about how Frank McKenzie is like, whoa, guys, I need, he's trying to cover his base, which is what all Frank McKenzie does.
Yeah, right.
But he goes, they're moving all this money into the Navy. And so he talks about, he goes, I'm going to exclusively focus on China if confirmed. And so with the Taiwan, and he says explicitly to prevent an attack on, what is he? I'll find the exact quote. He says to exclusively focus on China, moving our maritime strategy forward in order to protect Taiwan and all of our national security interests in the Indo-Pacific theater. So, and this is Obama's policy, shifting 2/3 of all air and naval forces to East Asia. So, and they use Taiwan to hype this up. And so we've been sending, last year it was revealed, I think some Taiwanese officials told their presses, this is not kosher to do, but they basically made it clear that, and I don't know if they walked it back, but it was like walking back the statement. It wasn't like, changing the policy. But essentially we send our Marine raiders to Taiwan to train and with the Taiwanese forces, and that it's something that just doesn't get talked about because it's such a such a dangerous, like, unnecessary provocation. So but anyway, I guess what I'm saying is this sort of thing where they can point at John Cena and go, "What a piece of shit this guy is." To me, it's getting people on board without thinking too much about it, with a policy that could be the end of the world if we actually try and, like, do this, like, take on China over Taiwan, which has nothing to do with this. Like, I love when Tim Pool is going nuts about Taiwan and then he says things like, "Why should I care about Palestine?" Like, I that's our responsibility. An apartheid state in Palestine, Israeli apartheid bombing Gaza, the concentration camp. This is the home demolitions, and the whole situation in Palestine is a disgrace, and it's one of the reasons we were attacked on 9/11, according to the official story. So, what what I mean? Like, that is our response. That's all you should care about that. And I don't know. I mean, what are you going to do about Taiwan? But the thing is my argument is Hollywood's a joke now. John Cena is one of our biggest actors. We should be more pissed about that, for crying out loud. But yeah, it's more of this thing. Like, I think Rogan talked a lot about this too, and it's just it's just a nice new way of manufacturing consent, because a lot of people like Sadra and Jetty will say that China controls our media, like they have all this influence over Hollywood and the big banks and these sorts of things, and Wall Street, and it's kind of this idea that, like, our ruling class is subservient or bought out by China, or bought out by China, and it just sort of flips the whole era of, like, Ron Paul and Occupy Wall Street and even the better elements of the Tea Party on its head, where their eyes are taken off the ball and they focus on the foreign other, and the one that's conveniently most targeted now by the empire, instead of focusing on the empire that's actually impoverishing us.
Well, it's like you know how Dave will say that the when Occupy Wall Street happened, everyone was kind of united in this populist wave, right? Well, you deflect that populist wave into the culture war politics, but also you supercharge it and misdirect it to China. And I think that's the general theme of the most recent piece that you put out. But what I wanted to kind of get at is, like, again, we were talking about this a lot before the show, but what is the libertarian place right now? Because one concern that I have, and I say this again out of a place of love, it's a love letter, but I see a lot of libertarians talking about things that, this is my opinion, man, but that don't matter. We're talking strategy all the time. We're talking drama all the time. We're talking fakertarians, all this messaging stuff. Frankly, why would we sit around and argue about messaging for so long if we're forgetting what the message is? And what is the most important message right now? Well, it's not to talk messaging, I'll tell you that. The most important messaging right now is to talk about the future of the most important topic, which is war and peace. And right now we are preparing for a war with China. We're in a Cold War with Russia and China. It's been declared. No one's talking about this right now, Connor. And I don't want to break my arm patting myself on the back, but the Libertarian Institute is talking about this. Dave DeCamp is talking about this. Rick Rosoff at AntiWar.com. All those people, but there's also people that we should be listening to in other independent media spaces who aren't bought out with this China narrative. And I've been trying to expand my horizons there, but I'm thinking, Media Roots Radio, Joanne Leone at Around the Empire, Jimmy Dore, he's like, jump in here with some names because I don't want to leave anyone out. But
no, those are three of the best. I don't know how good Dore is on China. I like I said, I think he's had Matt Stoller on, who's kind of really bad on the China issue. Kind of does a similar thing we're talking about with this sort of hijacking of the populist kind of animosity toward the ruling class and redirects it at China. But Dore is excellent on the new Cold War with Russia, like, no doubt, and has been debunking the hell out of Russiagate this whole time, and all the war on Syria, all the propaganda about Syria, and all these different things. Having Aaron Mate on to just demolish all the mainstream arguments, and that's incredible. My favorite yeah, if I'll start naming things, but like, yeah, no, libertarians should be reading like The Gray Zone, and they should be reading Responsible Statecraft, and they should be reading Information Clearinghouse, and actually, if you go to Future of Freedom Foundation, Hornberger's foundation, you go to Explore Freedom, and then you click Foreign Policy, and he's got every day he's updating articles from all over the place that
Yeah.
are just great.
Well,
On
I'm
foreign policy.
thinking if Doug Bondow too at Cato.
Sure.
I mean, just because there's the Mises Cato split doesn't mean we can't read people from Cato who are doing good work. You know,
The
and
Cato Foreign Policy Department is stacked. They have John Glazer, who was formerly with TAC and AntiWar.com, the American Conservative, who have a lot of great writers there, like Peter Van Buren and Doug Bondow, for instance. But Ted Galen Carpenter is there too. Both
yeah,
of those
yeah,
guys write for
yeah.
AntiWar.com. And yeah, Doug Banda, their foreign policy department is fantastic. I don't know much about the rest of the group of Cato, but their foreign policy department is legit and should not be slept on by any stretch. Those people are heroes.
And like I mean I guess like in all of my show, if you go back and listen to everything, I do not call out other libertarians. I won't do so by name, but I really feel so strongly about this that I'm not going to dance around it. And I mean, people need to read antiwar.com instead of just saying that they like antiwar.com. You know what I mean? Or
100%.
all this stuff, you know, and I see a lot of, you know, like friendly conversations happening, which I really appreciate. But and we're talking about yesterday's news, and it's great to talk about the war in the Middle East, but we do a lot of talking about the war in the Middle East and not a lot of reading about it and discovering things and telling people about those things. So it is so important for libertarians to be at the tip of the spear in this new Cold War. And I really appreciate that, you know, you're doing it, and Kyle and Will and all those people are doing it. And I would like to invite the rest of the movement to join us, you know?
100%. And you're leading the charge on the Uyghur issue, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know anybody who's better than you on this in our scene, or in most scenes. So I totally agree with you. And it's, you know, so I think that so here's my position for a while has been that the libertarian movement, like we should, I don't know, some of these like the names are escaping me, but like all the shit about like fakertarians and this kind of these splits and these things. To your point, there's either you've got a lot of like I don't want to say what I was, you know, it's kind of like, you know, circle jerk. People like patting each other on the back and endlessly kind of, you know, goofing around with that's all great. I understand. And that's fun for everybody. And I'm not, like I said, but I'm just saying that the libertarian movement is the best shot the anti-war movement has, because we have unequivocally the best foreign policy of any political party or ideology. We do not support military intervention. We have the non-aggression principle. We don't even think the Pentagon should exist, let alone something like the CIA or the you know, the FBI and the NSA and all this national security state post-Cold War stuff. So we should be at the tip of the spear of opposing every time they send a warship to the Black Sea, every time they send an aircraft carrier to the South China Sea or fly a B-52 over the Persian Gulf. They celebrated, NATO celebrated Memorial Day by flying B-52 bombers over every NATO state, 30 nations. Where was I don't know, I'm not gonna name names or factions or anything, but where were we? Like, what was, you know what I mean? Like, we should be leading the chart every single day. Like, here's the thing. I think that Trump was a neocon for all intents and purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But the marketing behind Trump was essentially exploiting the just like Bernie Sanders, because these guys they come from the establishment, really. I mean, they might not be the most popular guys amongst the ruling class, but they're of the establishment. And what they do is they kind of exploit the anti-establishment sentiment and then kind of redirect it into more conducive kind of venues. And also, like Trump, for instance, was able to drastically expand and really, you know, accomplish things that neocons have been trying to do for a very long time, whether it was on Israel, Russia, China, Iran, even Syria, that they hadn't been able to do previously. Now we have a permanent occupation in Syria, and it's not changing. It's not changing. In the eastern part of the country there under Biden. The Biden's just recently reaffirmed our support for Juan Guaido in Venezuela, the failed would-be coup leader. CIA stooge, basically NED type, USAID stooge over there. If you look at Yemen, Biden comes in, he goes, I'm going to end offensive operations and relevant arms sales. And we find out in April that the Pentagon, through the Foreign Military Sales Program, is still maintaining the warplanes for Saudi. Which, if we weren't doing that, it would ground the Saudi Air Force and virtually end the war. So the most important support we are still in fact supplying. So again, the libertarian movement and the party, I think, could distinguish itself much like Trump did. And if people want to look at Trump and go, hey, he was successful, we could learn from some of this stuff. Well, learn from the fact that he was calling out the establishment's some of their worst crimes. He ran against the war in Syria. He, you could, in some ways, escalated the war in Syria, bombing Damascus and killing, like I said, killing Russians there, and like I said, entrenching the occupation. But he ran against it. He ran against the war in Afghanistan, which, again, he escalated before he had Zalmay Khalilzad make the deal and set records for the number of bombs dropped there and all the rest of it. Same thing with Somalia. But people like the idea of being against the wars. People like the idea that this guy was coming out and saying things that you aren't allowed to say and opposing these detrimental policies that don't just kill large numbers of people overseas, but impoverish us here at home. And they're used as the number one way to take away our liberties here at home. So it's a slam dunk on every angle. Like, that's what's great about libertarianism vis-a-vis foreign policy, is that you can use libertarianism and Austrian economics as a weapon against the hawks. And so that's what we should be doing. And I think that, it would be great if we could have, like, I know AntiWarcom is not like a political, they're not associated with like Libertarian Party and this sort of thing, but like we should have, like, ideally like somebody like Dave or somebody like Scott Horton running that LP National account that everybody makes fun of all the time. I would much rather have that than, say, somebody like a Michael Malice, who I don't see focused on foreign policy nearly to the extent of somebody that, to the level that I would like to see. And I'm not saying Michael has to do that, but I'm just saying if somebody's going to be running that account, it should be somebody who's like reading Rick Rozoff and reading AntiWar.com and Libertarian Institute and the Ron Paul Institute and keeping up on all this stuff. Hell, give it to Dan McAdams. That would be amazing.
Yeah, right.
What the hell?
Just decrying all this stuff. I mean, in like, okay, you don't, I get that not everyone's into foreign policy. You don't have to be into foreign policy. The lockdowns and the COVID regime is very important too. But for Christ's sake, like, don't just have the same conversation over and over again about how much it sucks. Like, actually really research something to the point where you're an expert on it and you can bring out fact 1, 2, 3, 4. This is happening. This happened last week. Like, and to be good enough to actually speak on it with authority. I think we need more of that and less just kind of, and again, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a fun time, and I'm saying this out of a place of love, but we need to get our act together. Like, we need to be the tip.
Biden has sailed a warship at this rate. So Obama in 2016 sailed warships through the Taiwan Strait 12 times. Then Trump in 2020 he had to beat his record and did it 13 times. Now, then Biden comes in, and Biden, who, Tim Pool is like, oh, he's going to be weak on China, and the Taiwanese are scared to death over this, because I remember Dave was on his show and he goes, I don't know how the people of Syria feel about this win. Which, Biden and Trump were horrible in Syria, but the point is well taken. And then Tim Pool goes, yeah, what about the people in Taiwan? Like, and you know what I mean? Like, and now Biden has sent a warship at the rate he's done it 6 times through the Taiwan Strait. So once a month now, we're sailing warships through the Taiwan Strait. And you've got a power there, a nuclear superpower, our, greatest trading partner. We've got, the only economy that rivals the United States. They have 3-stage intercontinental ballistic missiles that can hit the U.S. Here at home. We can kill Americans here at home. And if we do go to war over Taiwan, or there's an accident that we have such bad relations with China right now, with all the different, we have planes up along near China's coast in the South China Sea. This was under Trump. This is last year. July, we were doing it 3 to 5 times a day. Now, the Chinese Defense Ministry has come out and said, actually, the numbers have gotten worse under Biden. We have, they said that warships now, the number of warships in the South China Sea and in the waters surrounding China have increased by 20%. The presence of planes, warplanes and spy planes has increased by 40%. So it's probably like 7 or so a day. And instead of posting the pictures of Taiwan's flag in, some Chinese politician's Twitter mentions, maybe we should be calling that out every single time it happens and go, look how much they don't care about you. This is all about making money for the worst people in our society, the military-industrial complex, and call them out. Like I made in the point in the piece. Like if you notice the piece I just wrote that talks about the right-wing populists and the corruption there with this policy. I don't really mention Trump's name. Like I go, this is a Democratic policy. This is Obama and Hillary Clinton. This is their Asia pivot. I've written enough about Trump. I'm going to write more, obviously, of course, but about how Trump escalated these policies. But I thought it was, fair to go, look, there's no reason for a conservative populist to support this military spending that even is going to ultimately dwarf what we were spending under Obama and Bush at the rate we're going. It's a slam dunk, and it's such an easy issue because it's like we have a gun to our heads and our own ruling class is holding it. And we're over here talking about the threat China poses. But their foreign policy, it's the anti-access area denial. We're over there stoking tensions, just like with Russia. Russia is not bringing all these countries. The Warsaw Pact doesn't exist. They're not bringing all these states that border the United. They're not like bringing Canada and Mexico into the Warsaw Pact in Latin America. They're not doing that. But we have, except for Belarus and Ukraine and Georgia, every state on the Black Sea other than Russia is either a NATO member or an enhanced opportunities partner, and we have drills there. You wrote about this in your piece. It's a great piece, and people should read. They want to get schooled on that. Read your piece first. Defender Europe 21, Trojan Footprint 21. Defender Europe is the biggest war games since the end of the Cold War, all in Eastern Europe on Russia's borders, and this formed the backdrop of all these tensions a couple months back with Ukraine.
Right.
And you look at, I'll just say, I think that I would love for the Libertarian Party to be like kind of an anti-neocon party, because the neocons are still ascendant. You could argue that they have more power now. Like CNAS has this absurd influence with all the different people they have connected to CNAS in the Biden administration, whether it's Eli Ratner advising Austin, who's a big China hawk, who says we need a combat credible posture in the Indo-Pacific. Kurt Campbell, who's a founder of CNAS with Michelle Flournoy, who's now, like I said, head of Indo-Pac affairs on the National Security Council. And he's got like a whole weapons wish list of things we should be, spending money on to target China, like long-range conventional cruise and ballistic missiles, unmanned carrier-based strike aircraft, underwater vehicles, guided missile submarines, and high-speed strike weapons. And he's writing this in Foreign Affairs. That's mainstream. That's Council on Foreign Relations. But, going to war, we're preparing war with China. That's neoconservative. This is guns blazing. This isn't realism. You know what I mean? Like, this is pretty crazy. So my argument is like, I always like referring to this quote because, Medea Benjamin and Nicholas Davies wrote a great piece about Michelle Flournoy when she was a shoo-in, it seemed, to be Biden's defense secretary. Now, if Michelle Flournoy helped engineer the wars, she's been kind of a Democratic Party type neocon for a long time, serving in the Clinton administration, really making she was a supporter of the Iraq War, big supporter of the Iraq War and the surge. And she came in, she was Undersecretary of Defense for Policy under Obama for the first several years of his administration. And I think she left in 2013. But while she was there, she helped engineer she was one of the architects of the Afghan surge. She helped, lead us, engineer the wars in Syria and Libya. And she's one of the worst China hawks in our society. Now, she wants to be able to sink the entire civilian and merchant fleet of China in the event of a war within 72 hours. This is who is going to be leading the Pentagon. And if you look at when they brought in Austin, the main gripe that Republicans had was not that this guy was from Raytheon. not that he committed treason as head of CENTCOM, arguably by taking the Al-Qaeda side in the war in Yemen, committing a genocide, ostensibly to fight the Houthis, and this myth of, well, it's not a myth, but the idea that Iran is arming Yemen, the Houthis, is BS. Like, it's not getting through the blockade. They have enough weapons. They're flush. They're exporting weapons even during the war. But anyway, so Flournoy wrote a piece for CNAS. It was basically, distinguishing, because they thought Hillary was going to be president. This is in 2016. What Obama's policy, or what Hillary's policy should be vis-a-vis Obama's, how it should contrast. And she writes it with Eric Edelman and Stephen Hadley. These are Bush 2 neocons. And Robert Kagan, who's founder of Project for New American Century with Bill Kristol and Victoria Nuland's husband. And so here's the excerpt from that piece that Medea Benjamin and Davies wrote. So in 2016, Flournoy was tipped as Hillary Clinton's choice for Secretary of Defense. She co-authored a CNAS report titled Expanding American Power with a team of hawks that included former Cheney aide Eric Edelman, PNAC co-founder Robert Kagan, and Bush's national security advisor Stephen Hadley. The report was seen as a view of how Clinton's foreign policy would differ from Obama's, with calls for higher military spending, arms shipments to Ukraine, renewed military threats against Iran, more aggressive military action in Syria and Iraq, all of which Trump has adopted. So, and people thought, there's this whole thing. It's like, Trump, like I said, is he's the anti-neocon. The neocons are trying to sabotage him with Russiagate. And that all may be true, but there's different factions of neocons. There's a group of neocons that were more focused on China and Iran. And his administration in many respects represented them, like people like Elliot Abrams being the envoy for Iran and Venezuela, which is insane. So anyway, that's what I think we need to be talking about that, because if you look at Biden's policy, Biden is carrying on all those policies. We've already thrown hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of tons of weapons to Ukraine during all these tensions. And, actually, to get attention, talk about the Nazis in Ukraine's government in the coup, after the coup that Victoria Nuland, who's now the highest ranking member of our foreign service, engineered with Joe Biden. So talk about that. It's so funny. Biden and Trump are running against each other, both supporting this Nazi-infested government, on both ends of that, and the argument is you have people saying we got to support them to fight the Russians there so we don't have to fight them over here. Right. And they're accusing Trump of treason because they're going, he was going to try and hold off aid for a minute to get this information on Biden to use against him in the election, Ukraine gate. And what's ironic is one of the others should have been able to say, you're a Nazi collaborator on a debate stage. The fact is both of them were. So What we need is somebody like Dave coming in, or the Libertarian Party coming in and calling out this shit for what it is, because we're committing a genocide in Yemen. We back apartheid in Israel. We support Nazis in Ukraine, and we're preparing for war with China. Most Americans don't really know about all this, and we're kind of sleepwalking into this third World War, this new Cold War paradigm that gets worse and worse, it seems, with each administration. So that's like I said, that's a winning strategy, I think, to really hit on, because also it's the leading cause of all the business cycles and everything too. If you look at there's a reason why our economy crashed after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2007 and 2008, because of all the money printing and all the artificially lowering of the interest rates and the misallocations. And, it was, that's what Ron Paul, one of the reasons why Ron Paul became so popular was because he was predicting all this while he was running. And then I believe after the election, or just before, Obama comes in, the economy crashes and everybody goes, that guy was right. And he was right about everything. He still is. So that, let's look at Ron Paul too, because that's the message, is talk about the wars first and talk about the Fed and red pill people on that. And of course, you can talk about the lockdowns, all that stuff too. But I don't even think they would have been. I mean, maybe. What do you think? I mean, I don't know that they would have been able to pull off half of what they did during the COVID crisis had we not been in a state of perpetual war for the last couple of decades, and also I don't know that without all the previously existing kind of anti-Russia hysteria and this kind of schizophrenic kind of paradigm we live in with the mass media talking about Russia and China, if people would have accepted that kind of blatant tyranny, if we weren't always at war and we weren't an empire, the American people have gone to war with their government over a lot less than the way we get treated by our ruling class. So I'm, with the, go back to the Revolutionary War, but that's the thing, all of this stuff is kind of, because it's the whole core of their right to power over us, to the extent that they have it, is based on this idea of without us, you'd be speaking Chinese right now implicitly,
right.
and it's like, get them there.
I remember being in elementary school, and there was a kid at our table who ended up going and fighting in Iraq. Fast forward, 15 years. And I specifically remember him saying that we would be speaking German right now if, World War II hadn't, we hadn't fought in World War II. Yeah. So, unfortunately he went through a lot of things and saw a lot of his friends die, but, it's just, one last thing, cause I gotta get running here, but it's just, again, it's a love letter to libertarians in our circles. We got to be good on this, and we need to be good on it now. And we mentioned messaging and what the messaging should be. We shouldn't either sit around and debate messaging all day without saying what the message is. So let's say the message first and just lead by example, I guess. So, Connor, so just remind everyone where they can find your work.
Absolutely. Libertarian Institute. All my stuff goes up there. You find me on conflicts of interest. I hope to be back here soon as well on Liberty Weekly. And you can find me often in the blog at AntiWarcom or in the Viewpoints.
All right. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much.
Oh, and my Twitter is at Freeman's Mind 96 as well.
Oh, yeah. So follow Connor. You post a lot of stories and stuff too, right? Or...
Oh, yeah, I retweet a lot of articles, too.
Okay.
I'm always retweeting AntiWar.com and different articles I read throughout the day, or, when I remember to, because, man, there's a lot of shit out there. And like you were just talking about, I think I kind of, for a long time, that's how I got into all this stuff, is just reading all this independent media stuff, legit anti-establishment, independent media journalism, and just kind of I learned through Twitter, actually, through a lot of reading AntiWar.com, and then also following the different people that I found through that site and through the Scott Horton show on Twitter. And actually, if you do that and sort of, like you said, branch out beyond our own kind of echo chamber, not that there's anything wrong with that, but one of the good things about Twitter, I don't know if they work. I'm sure that they do. One of the problems with the algorithms is that you can get your vision kind of narrowed, and but at the same time, follow Scott, follow AntiWar.com, follow all these different news sites, and you'll find different people you should be following, and you can be exposed to all kinds of information and all kinds of people who are actually really good on a lot of things that we can agree on, and we can build a much stronger movement if we diversify in that way. But stay, like you said, committed to being anti-imperialist. Don't let neocons into the don't bring in any people like Sadr and Jetty or Tucker or whoever the hell it is that's pushing this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
we gotta be solid.
Hell yeah. And it's tough, it takes work and effort and energy, and so other people, to follow Dave DeCamp, of course, he retweets a lot of really good stuff, but Joanne Leone of Around the Empire, she's not really a libertarian, although she's really friendly with us. And she has a lot of good stuff. Her podcast is excellent, doing deep dives.
Around the Empire is amazing.
It is. Yeah. And, I've liked Media Roots Radio and the Empire Files, Robbie and Abby Martin. But, also Kyle Anzalone does a news roundup on the Institute every single weekday. He does this, and he's been doing it for years. So if you want to know more, just read 5 stories every morning. 3 stories, 3 stories every day or something like that. But, all right. Well, anyway, thanks so much, man, for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And we're going to have to do it again soon.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much, man. Really enjoyed it. Be back soon.